Well, the 2026 U.S. Senate election in Maine right now is scheduled for November 2026 to elect the next senator from the state of Maine. Right now, we have incumbent Republican Senator Susan Collins, who is expected to run for a sixth term. And the big question on everyone's mind is, can Republicans win in the state of Maine? Can they win the Senate election in 2026? We know Maine is a moderately blue state. They have voted for the Democrat presidential nominee every election since 1992, and they supported Kamala Harris in 2024 by roughly about 7 points, I believe, about 6.9 percentage points she won the state by. Despite this, Susan Collins has a history of overperformance. She has won re-election multiple times, including 8.5 points, an 8.5 point margin against Democrat Sarah Gideon in the 2020 election, despite the prediction that she was going to lose. It was very much expected that she was going to lose in 2020. She ended up winning about 51% of the vote, but still, she won by 8.5 percentage points. Look at this right here. You can go through all of the predictions. Not a single prediction service thought that Susan Collins would win. Not a single one. Remember, look at this. At the same time, Susan Collins won the state by 8.5 points. At the same time, Biden won the state in 2020 by 9 percentage points. This is where it starts to get big, though. You go back further than 2020. You go to 2014. Susan Collins won almost 70% of the vote. Go back to 2008. Susan Collins wins 22% of the vote. Well, at the same time, she won 61%. It was a 22-point margin. At the same time, this is where it gets really wild. Barack Obama swept across the country, won the state of Maine by 17 percentage points. Susan Collins still ran ahead of him. Now, in 2026, the election will coincide with 2 U.S. House elections for Maine's congressional districts, a gubernatorial election, and various local races that will ultimately add to the complexities of the primary and of what issues are going to be most relevant in this election. Obviously, it's not a presidential election, so you will have a lot of national issues, but you're not going to have the same magnifying glass on the national issues like you would in, let's say, 2020 or 2024. That's just not a reality. Now, Democrats currently control the governorship, they control the state legislature, and both U.S. House seats in Congress. Now, granted, one of the House seats, the Democrats only won by about a 0.5 percentage point. Jared Golden won it by about a 0.5 percentage point in 2024, but they still control both congressional seats as of right now, which it is a challenging environment for Republicans. Like, let's not... Statewide, in Susan Collins' seat, it's kind of special. Statewide, though, we know it's a very, very challenging environment for Republicans. And the state's use of ranked choice voting could also influence the outcome in exactly how politicians go about campaigning for this election. Now, let's just take a look at the overall 2026 Senate election. This is where I'm at as of right now, and sorry about that. This just happens where it's like an ad pops up, but I have an ad blocker, and it just blocks it, and then this happens. So weird. Happens all the time, but that's besides the point. This is the map where I currently have it right now. Currently, I have the toss-up states as Georgia, North Carolina, and Michigan. I did make a change recently to put Michigan into the toss-up category. I had it as a lean blue, and then kind of made the determine through some, just sitting on it, some research into it. I determined that I want to have this as a toss-up state as of right now. Minnesota is a lean blue state, New Hampshire is a lean blue state, and Maine is a lean red state as of right now. So ultimately, Republicans currently hold 53 seats in the Senate. Democrats have 47s, and Collins is the only GOP senator up for re-election in a state that Kamala Harris won in 2024. Now, unlike on the Democrat side of the aisle, there are two Democrat-held seats that are up for re-election in states that Trump won in 2024. Michigan and Georgia. Trump won the state of Georgia by about 2 percentage points, about 2.5, and I believe he won Michigan by a little over a point. 1.5 points, Trump won Michigan. 2.2 percentage points, he won the state of Georgia. You have John Ossoff in Georgia, and then Gary Peters, who's not running for re-election in Michigan, but ultimately, as he is a Democrat right now, it is held by the Democrat Party. So if a Republican were to win, that would be a Republican flip. And Democrats see this as a prime opportunity to flip a seat and shrink the GOP majority. Now, I say shrink the GOP majority because of Just the simple fact, right now, I have the Democrats ceiling at 49 seats. If everything goes the way the Democrats want it to, I have them at 49 seats. This is their ceiling. I just, even if they were to flip, I just don't see them, no matter how you combine all these, if they were to flip Alaska or Ohio or something like that. I ultimately just do not see that happening. I do not see Democrats taking back the Senate in 2026. It is probably an extreme long shot. There's probably a better chance that Donald Trump will serve 3 terms than the Democrats will flip the Senate in 2026. I might regret saying that, but I probably won't regret saying that. But ultimately, I think they would have to perform very well just for it to go off. Just for them to win 49 seats, they would have to perform extremely, extremely well. But so now let's take a look at this Senate seat in Maine. What is on the line here in Maine right now? So like we said, Susan Collins has been in the Senate for almost 30 years at this point. Initially elected back in 1996. 1996. Let's get back here. Let's see, 2002, 98, 96 right here. Susan Collins won the state of Maine by 5.5 points back in 1996. Now remember, this was Bill Clinton. This was his second re-election, or his second election. It was his re-election campaign in 1996. Obviously, you saw a rightward shift in the Senate, at least. You saw Alabama was a pickup for the Republicans. Arkansas was a pickup for the Republicans. Looks like L.A. actually was held on, or excuse me, Louisiana was held on by the Democrats. In South Dakota, you had Tim Johnson, who actually flipped this, and then in Nebraska, you had a Democrat or a Republican who flipped this seat right here. So obviously, won back while Bill Clinton was president. That's how long she's been in the Senate. And she's been in the Senate for almost 30 years at this point now, and is at the peak of her influence in Washington, D.C. She is. But Democrats, time and time again, Democrats have lined up for this seat. Fast forward, 2002, you actually saw, she was actually a representative from the 2nd Congressional District, Shelley Pingree, ran in 2002. She is actually seen as a potential nominee to run against Susan Collins in 2026. 2002, Susan Collins won a pretty handedly re-election of 16 percentage points, almost tripled her margin. Fast forward to 2008, like we said, great year for Democrats nationwide. They flipped Minnesota. Al Franken won, beat out Norm Coleman. You saw a number of seats flip to the Democrats here. Even North Carolina, Kay Hagan won this seat here. New Hampshire, you saw Jaheen Shaheen beat out John Sununu, the brother of Chris Sununu. Great year for Democrats. But where's Susan Collins? Expanding her margin of victory from where she was in 2002. Really expanded on her margin of victory. Fast forward to 2014. She wins almost 70 percentage points. Granted, 2014 was a great year for Republicans. Republicans swept the country. Look at this. They flipped North Carolina. They flipped West Virginia. Bill Cassidy won in Louisiana. Tom Cotton won in Arkansas. Joni Ernst. You saw Mike Rounds. Is it Tim Daines? Steve Daines. Goodness gracious. Maybe I need some coffee right now. You saw Cory Gardner win in Colorado. Obviously, Republicans swept nationwide in 2014, up and down the ballot. And Susan Collins, of course, overperforming. You know, when the wind's at your back, she really performed here. But fast forward to 2020, she saw really her closest margin of victory that she's seen since she was initially elected back in 1996. Now, granted, this was a year where Democrats, it wasn't great for Democrats. It wasn't great for, you look at 2020. People want to think that 2020 was this big sweep to the left. And now, granted, if you look at the popular vote, it kind of was. But a lot of that popular vote comes out of California. It comes out of New York. They run the margin up there. But if you look nationwide, Biden only won Georgia by 0.5 percentage point. He only won Pennsylvania by a point. Michigan, he won by 3 points. But Arizona. So you're looking at this map right here. You have 3 states here that are within, about 0.5 percentage point? This one's a little over half, but, 3/5 of a percentage point, all of these seats are within. So Trump wasn't that far off from winning. He just needed to win in some of these states here where obviously he didn't win. But ultimately, that's where we're at right now, because you can see Democrats, they only won 51% of the popular vote. It wasn't this huge swing. Republicans actually increased their margin from 2016 in this election here. Now, there's a lot you have to consider looking at the Maine election going into 2026. Obviously, we know it could be a tough year for Republicans nationwide. Like, let's just be realistic about this. It could be a tough year for Republicans nationwide. Historically speaking, midterms are not good for the party that's in power. They're just not. It is not good for the party that is typically in power. But we really now have to consider, how can Republicans win in the state of Maine? That's the big question here. Now, I'd say number one, don't primary Susan Collins. That number one, do not beat her up before it is already going. Look, I understand. There are people who think that Susan Collins is inadequate, that she is not a good senator, that she breaks with the party at the worst times. And you know what? And I understand. But here's the reality. If Susan Collins didn't, this seat would be held by a Democrat. You can either have a Republican who's going to vote with you 70% of the time, or you can have a Democrat who's going to vote with you 2% of the time. That is the reality here. This is a state that is completely controlled by Democrats. The governor, the legislator, the Congress. Now, granted, they have a Republican and an independent senator, but the independent senator definitely leans to the left. He caucuses with the Democrat Party. So let's not kid ourselves here. Let's not sit here and and act like we know everything, because we don't. The reality is that if Susan Collins is not on this ballot, the Democrats will win this race. This will be a flip for the Democrats. This will become on my map over here, this will become a likely Democrat seat if they decide to go that route. It will. So don't primary Susan Collins. Do not make her spend money where she doesn't need to. Don't make the Republicans fight between themselves. And I think that Republicans, especially Collins in the state, need to adopt some very, very secure strategies, like leveraging her bipartisanship. Collins has a great ability to work across the aisle, especially when it comes to healthcare, infrastructure, climate change. Regardless of if you're a Republican in a different state, and regardless if you like that or not, this is what appeals to voters in Maine. You really have to highlight her independence from national Republican controversies. You have to, especially in this election, have a separation between the national Republicans and Susan Collins in the state of Maine if she wants to win this re-election. She has to position herself as a Maine first senator, not a senator that's just going to go along with whatever the National Republican Party wants. Because this 100% aligns with the center-right focus on practical and pragmatic governance. People like politicians who get things done. She is pragmatic and she gets things done. And she also, of course, like any election, you have to address concerns that are specific to Maine. We know Maine relies on two industries, tourism and fishing. Those are big industries in Maine. And you have to make sure your appeal, or your persona that you have, can appeal to those types of people. People in the fishing industry, people in the tourism industry. Collins is a senior, has worked 30 years to get this very highly sought after position in the Senate. She's one of the top appropriators in the Senate. And it really, that allows her and gives her the ability to secure tons of federal funding for these areas when it comes to, whether it's subsidies, whatever it is, for the local economy in Maine. You really have to focus on those local issues. And mobilizing the base. Ensure that you have high turnout among Republican voters by focusing on conservative values, tax cuts, deregulation, Second Amendment rights. That is what's going to be crucial to turning out the base. Because if you don't have the base, you cannot rely on independents and moderate Democrats to come over and vote for you. You still have to turn out the base at the end of the day. You have to make the case to them, to these Republicans who maybe don't want to vote for you. But look, you can either vote for me and I'm going to vote with what you want 75% of the time, or I lose and you have no Republican representation in Congress on the House or the Senate side. You literally have no Republicans, serious Republicans, whether it's statewide or federal or congressional level. I guess congressional is federal too, but that's representing you. You just have to. Because she has experience. Her seniority gives her the ability to bring tons of federal resources to Maine, which could be lost if a less experienced Democrat wins. Her potential chairmanship of the Appropriations Committee is a very strong selling point, at least I believe, for Susan Collins going into this election. And if a Democrat candidate is seen as too progressive or out of touch, especially this guy who's potentially running, gosh, what's his name? Jordan Wood, former chief of staff for Katie Porter, definitely will be seen as too progressive, and that's something you can focus on. And look at this. Susan Collins has $3.2 million cash on hand going into this election. The National Republican Senatorial Committee said they are willing to spend hundreds of millions of dollars in this race. Hundreds of millions of dollars in this race. So they want to keep this seat. There is no doubt about that. Absolutely no doubt about this whatsoever. And it's kind of neat that the Cook Political Reports, 2 of these prediction services already have it as a lean Republican. They didn't even have that in 2020. So she may already have this going for her as of right now. But yes, like I said, if the Democrat candidate is seen too out of touch with Maine voters, this would work in Collins' favor. She needs to lean into it. Frame the election as a choice between Collins and her proven record or an untested challenger. Because in a blue state, and in a blue state like this, Collins must distance herself from the more extreme national Republican positions to maintain appeal to independents, moderate Democrats, especially given the historical midterm trends. Like, that is going to be a big thing she is going to have to deal with going into this election. But all in all, Susan Collins has a good record to run on. If you're a MAGA Republican, you may not like it, but for the right of center, moderate, where the majority of people are, they like that. They like someone who is practical, who is pragmatic, who gets things done. She can run on her bipartisan leadership, a role in securing federal resources for the state, protecting Maine's economy. And really, she just actually, I believe it was right before Biden left office, she passed a bill that she's been trying to pass for 20 years, but it was basically to expand Social Security to, I believe it was people who had worked in the private sector whose spouses worked in the public sector. There were some rules there that basically reduced the amount of money that they were going to get. Basically, people who worked in the public system who didn't pay into Medicare for a certain period of time, maybe they paid into the state pension fund and that replaced Medicare for them. But their other jobs maybe had paid into Medicare, but their benefits were going to be reduced to it. Now, granted, did it add, $20 billion to the debt every year by giving benefits to people in Maine that it's like they knew going into this that they were not going to get benefits. But that's also something she can run on. I wasn't a fan of it, but ultimately there's a lot of people in the state of Maine that wanted that. You look at her national security record, her environmental efforts. To win, she must mobilize independents and Republicans. She must. And contrast herself effectively with the Democrats. We already know that Jared Golden, who was seen as probably the best candidate to run in this race, is not going to run. Now, remember, Jared Golden was a former staffer for Susan Collins, I believe in like 2013, 2012, in that area. You look back, Golden didn't endorse anyone in the 2020 race out of her personal feelings for Susan Collins because he likes her. He likes her at a personal level, something you really don't see in politics anymore. But by emphasizing her proven results in Maine-centric, a Maine first senator, not someone who goes along with the Republican Party or the Democrats, someone who is independent, who is going to do what is best for the people of Maine, that is how they win. That is how Republicans win in the state of Maine. So that is going to wrap things up for today, folks. As always, drop down below, hit that subscribe button, make sure you never miss another video from us again in the future, and just let me know, what are your thoughts down below? Do you think that this is how Republicans win? Do you think there's other way that Republicans can win in the state of Maine? As always, let me know down below, and we will catch you next time, folks.